Thank you, Stephen, for the opportunity of speaking with Birmingham City Council, who, according to the Soccer Report, is the most social media connected council in Britain. So I think I'm going to learn quite a bit in the sessions that follow my presentation. But first, I'd like to say a few words that brought me here today to be speaking about social media. As Stephen says, I come from a background, I don't come from a technology background, I come from a background in organisational sector-wide change. And there's a couple of key principles that I learned very early on in my career and underpin a lot of my work. And the first is at least 80% of what you want to know about anything that your organisation is involved in already exists somewhere in your organisation. The challenge is finding where that knowledge exists and how do you link it up. In the mid-90s, I did some work with telecommunications organisations in establishing intelligence cells, and they found that 80% of the information they needed to know about what their competitors were planning to do already existed within their own organisation. The second point, which is linked to the first, is the importance of diversity. If you get a group of engineers in a room, they'll have a particular way of thinking. If you have a group of marketers in a room, they'll have a completely different way of thinking. Now, as Stephen has already said, and you all know, Birmingham is a very complex, Birmingham City Council is a very complex organisation working in a very complex operation environment. And so if you really, when you want to address and solve particular challenges or leverage opportunities, it's very important to get as much diversity in that thinking, because it's diversity that challenges traditional and entrenched thinking, and it's that that enables innovation. When I was over in New Zealand, I had a wonderful opportunity to work for the Ministry of Education on 50 projects. And this enabled me to work horizontally right across the ministry, right across government, right across the education sector and across communities. And it gave me valuable insight to what all of the different projects were working at an operational level. But I also worked strategically. So I was taking concepts like formative assessment to improve teaching and learning and taking that right down in the project. So actually, what does that mean in the classroom for the teacher and the student? And so what got me thinking was, what I used to put in my plans for each of the project managers was an overview of where their work fitted strategically with the work of the ministries and the sectors were doing, and what was happening operationally. So in each project plan it says your work is connected to all these other projects, this is the knowledge you need to access, and these are the people you need to speak to. So in effect, what I was clockwork social media. So when I went to Manchester University in 2007, I noticed something very interesting. It was the administrative staff that were using Facebook. And what I found was I could access information a lot quicker through the Facebook network than I could find information on the university website. When I was working at Manchester, they received quite a bit of funding to work with local authorities on helping set up the local strategic partnerships and the local area agreements. So it was all around collaborative working. And one of the smaller projects they ran was a virtual town. And what would happen was that local authorities would play the game around the local town. And so you would have people representing health, housing, transport, third sector, emergency services. And they would go through a planning reiteration that represented one every 4 years. And what was interesting, what happened in the first reiteration was that people would have their budget, they would have the issues they have to deal with, and they would sit and spend their budget accordingly. What happened over the next 3 iterations was that by collaborating, that's when they really started to address the issues, and that's when they scored the highest points. And it actually got quite competitive between departments who scored the highest points. And having witnessed one of these sessions, which lasted a day, I was really impressed with the change of thinking that apparently happened in that workshop. The issue was that when these managers went back to their day job, they're overwhelmed with their day job, and I thought, what could you actually link, or what tools could you use to enable those managers to continue that collaborative working they've experienced in the workshop? And just like connecting people through clockwork, I thought the social media tools offer part of the answer. And what I'm going to look at today, I'm not going to talk about Facebook, Twitter and Flickr. What I am going to talk about is how social media can improve communications and collaborations across an organisation. How that can improve communications and collaborations with your customers, and how that can lead to the design and the provision of better services. Social media does something very simple. The first thing it does, it brings visibility where there's no visibility before. Because you have visibility, people start to communicate with one another. When people start to communicate with one another, you start to develop networks. So it networks people, services, knowledge, activities. So when people start networking, they start collaborating. When people start collaborating, that's when you get transformational change in your organisation. I'm just going to give an example of this with Air New Zealand. When I was back in New Zealand about 3 years ago, I was given access to a new reporting system that Air New Zealand had just purchased. And the purpose of that reporting system was to bring the customer voice inside the organisation, and it was to give senior managers access to what customers were saying about the organisation. That was it. So it's not a social media tool. But John Fife, the then CE of Air New Zealand, made it social media. Because he said, everyone sees this. It's not just senior managers. I want cabin crew, I want check-in crew, I want call centre. I want everyone in this organisation to see what the customer is saying about us. Because we were #1 airline 6 years ago, we're now 11. And I want us to be #1 again. So instantly, John Fife gave visibility across the organisation. Now when I started looking in the system, what excited me was the communications that started, because everyone could see what the customer was saying. So a customer made a complaint or they'd made a suggestion. And what I was seeing was somebody in back office, an accountant in LA, somebody who was cabin crew working out of Tokyo, somebody who's on check-in in Auckland. And then this is where it's important this diversity start coming together, accessing the knowledge that sits everywhere in that organisation. And what they were saying was, this is what we understand the issue is. This is what we should do about it. This is the benefit to Air New Zealand. This is the benefit for customers. Now that type of collaboration, instant response, can take months, can take years, can take 18 months. This was happening in weeks. The second thing I thought, well, I wonder what managers are going to think about this. Is it taking their role away from them? But what it gave managers visibility as well. So they could see what people were saying, they could see what they were suggesting. So it was then the role of the manager to say, this is a good idea, we'll resource, we'll make it happen. Social media has grown in the public space. Not organisations have decided this is how they should work. Social media has grown in the public space, and it's in that public space that the use and the conventions of use have been created. So organisations gradually become aware of what's happening in the public space. And some of the reasons for this is changing the power relationship. It's shifting the power relationship away from organisations to customers. And I'll show you a short video shortly that will demonstrate this. As organisations start to become aware of what's happening in the public space, and they start to adopt it, it's adopted generally in two ways. People who are traditionally customer-facing, like marketing, sales, communications, start to take the initiative and start using social media tools to communicate with customers. Or the organisation says, your communications, your marketing, do something with social media. And that's where most organisations are at the moment. The next stage is people starting using Enterprise 2. Let's have a show of hands of how many people have heard the term Enterprise 2 or know what it means. Web 2? Okay. Web 2 is social media in the public space. It's Facebook, Twitter. It's anything the public use is Web 2. Enterprise 2 is the same technology, but it's used from a business. That's essentially what it is in a nutshell. Logitech, make technology. Customers speak to customers. One of the last people they're going to speak to is an organisation. Logitech started using Enterprise 2 to listen to what their customers were saying, not communicating, but listening. And what they discovered was their brand new wireless keyboard people were not happy with. And the reason was they couldn't switch it off, couldn't find the on-off switch. They didn't contact Logitech, they started speaking amongst themselves. Now, using Enterprise 2 tools to monitor what customers were saying, Logitech realised they had a problem. So they used social technology to start to communicate with customers to say, well, this is where the on-off switch is. And they also fed it back into production to say, we actually need to change the design of this thing. So there you've got customers are now actually involved in the design of product. Using Enterprise 2 to engage and connect employees. And this is where organisations like Air New Zealand are. And this year they've moved from 7th to 5th. Because they're listening to the customer's voice and they're responding to the customer voice. And it's the employees within the organisation through a whole range of channels, not just traditional marketing, comms and sales channel, to speak with the customer. Integrating Web 2, Enterprise 2, connecting employees with customers. Best Buy is a really good example. They decided that right across their organisation there's a lot of people, not just customer facing, who know about their products. And so they said anyone in the organisation can answer any tweet from a customer. They reckon that initiative alone nets them 500 million US per annum by allowing staff across the organisation to speak directly with customers. So that's allowing customers to have access to that knowledge that's spread right across the organisation. Web 2 supporting Enterprise 2, connecting customers with customers. This is a classic. How many of you got Dell computers? If you've got a problem with your Dell computer, where do you go to find out the answer? See those guys at the back? Most people go to the Dell's website to get an answer if they've got a problem with their Dell computer. But it's a customer that gives that answer. It's the same with Microsoft. A lot of times you go to help and it sends you on the internet somewhere to tell you how to actually do something with Office. It's not Microsoft telling you, it's another customer. So eventually, following this maturity model, the ideal place to get to is where customers are supporting customers and that you facilitate that interaction.